If you ever believed that one determined voice could shake the foundations of a centuries-old institution, then you're about to see that belief vindicated. Hospitals, despite their polished marble floors and gleaming corridors, often run on traditions and invisible hierarchies that go unquestioned for decades. But sometimes, change arrives quietly, carried not by someone wielding overt power, but by a single woman whose presence is impossible to ignore. The saga began in a place where stethoscopes hung like medals, and every badge was displayed with pride. A place where decisions could spell the difference between life and death, and where, curiously, the most vital and compassionate work was often overshadowed by a rigid order of seniority. This was Metropolitan General Hospital, perched elegantly in Manhattan's Upper East Side. As the sun rose over the city, its rays streamed through the hospital's lofty windows, casting luminous trails on polished tiles, tracing paths walked by the ambitious and the desperate alike. Metropolitan General had always been a crucible for greatness and heartbreak, a place where both careers and lives were made and lost with the turn of fate. Its reputation, impeccable. Its expectations, relentless. For many, the heartbeat of the hospital pulsed hardest on the 8th floor, home to the renowned cardiology unit. Here, tension hummed in the air, like the quiet anticipation of a coming storm. Every decision laden with consequences. Amidst this high-wire ballet, Maya Washington arrived for her shift. The first to step off the elevator just before 7 a.m., she moved with an assurance that defied her youth. At 21, Maya was just beginning her journey. Yet her manner suggested wisdom beyond her years. Her uniform was immaculate, stark white, in deliberate contrast to her warm, deep skin. Her natural hair, which she wore pulled back into a sleek bun, was a declaration of both elegance and cultural pride. Though she claimed only 6 months on this floor, there was an ineffable steadiness about her, an aura that made even veterans stop and take stock. The newness of her badge stood in sharp contrast to the way she scanned the environment. Every monitor, every chart, every face. To the uninitiated, Maya may have looked like simply another diligent nurse, but to those paying attention, there was something almost uncanny in her navigational ease. When she greeted attending physicians, there was not a whisper of trepidation. Instead, her voice conveyed a calm assurance, the poise of someone who knew her value, even if others failed to recognize it. By the nurse's station, Janet Rodriguez was finishing her long night shift. At 40, Janet was as much a fixture of the cardiology unit as the monitors and heart charts. She had witnessed the arrival and departure of many young nurses. None, however, had made quite the impression Maya did. Janet couldn't suppress her curiosity about this new nurse, whose understated confidence seemed to upset the balance of power in their world. "Morning, Maya," Janet called out as Maya approached, her every movement deliberate and disciplined, as if she'd been trained not just in nursing, but somewhere that demanded even greater precision. "Good morning, Janet. Everything all right?" "Any emergencies I should be ready for this morning?" Maya asked, already accessing the electronic patient charts with impressive ease. There was just a bit of a scare with Mrs. Patterson in 8:02. Arrhythmia at 3. Been monitoring her since, but nothing dramatic. Maya's eyes flicked over the digital chart. She paused in her review, noting that Mrs. Patterson was on digitalis. Without missing a beat, she asked, "Were her potassium levels checked?" A drop could mean real trouble in conjunction with that medication, and I apologize to the author for interrupting this story. I would be very pleased if my listener would like, subscribe, and leave their thoughts on this story in the comments. I won't delay you any longer. Enjoy. Janet, surprised, realized she'd nearly missed that detail. In 15 years, rarely had she heard a nurse of Maya's experience draw that connection so quickly. Most new nurses focused on immediate tasks, the how of their job, not the why. But Maya asked the kind of questions physicians did, probing deeper, looking for patterns and warning signs. Janet regarded her with newfound respect. That's not something they teach in orientation. Maya's quiet response was telling. Once you understand how digitalis works, how it inhibits the sodium-potassium exchange, you realize why electrolyte monitoring is crucial. Especially in frail cardiac patients, one oversight could be fatal. As the two women attended to Mrs. Patterson, Janet found herself thinking about how Maya's perspective could transform the standard of care throughout the unit. This wasn't just competence, this was vision. A kind of clinical intuition that usually came only after years under pressure. Janet wasn't alone in noticing. Whispers had already begun among certain staff, some admiring, others apprehensive. Watching from above, in an office designed for strategic surveillance, Dr. Richard Sterling's scrutiny rarely wavered. At 48, he'd shaped his career around an unbending belief in hierarchy. He was the guardian of order in a territory where chaos was often the enemy and unpredictability was to be stamped out with rules and rituals. Despite his own accomplishments, Sterling's pride stemmed as much from his control over subordinates as his mastery of medicine. But Maya Washington, with her unyielding composure, unsettled him. It was not just that she was competent. It was that she expressed thoughts beyond her pay grade, seemingly unafraid of the invisible but ever-present barriers of rank, race, and gender. Her presence, in his mind, was an anomaly. Not defiant, not overtly rebellious, but exuding a serene confidence, as if she saw through the masks of authority and weighed everyone, including him, solely by their merit. He found himself combing through her personnel file repeatedly, searching for the catch. Maya Elizabeth Washington, degree from Columbia, summa cum laude, a handful of superlative references, but nothing on paper explained the graceful dominance she exhibited. Her ability to lead with silence rather than noise. There was an itch at the back of Sterling's mind, a fear that somewhere she knew something he did not. On the floor, Sterling watched as Maya went beyond routine duties. She didn't just fulfill her assignments. She educated families, explained complex procedures without condescension, and collaborated across professional boundaries. Her warmth won the respect of patients' relatives, while her clear-eyed logic won allies among the medical staff, except for the ones who viewed her competence as a threat to the natural order. It wasn't just what she did. Sterling told himself anxiously. It was how she did it. Nurses were supposed to defer, not debate. To follow protocols, not illuminate the gray areas physicians missed in their hurry or fatigue. Her refusal to show deference made her an outlier, and in a system built on tradition, outliers forced uncomfortable questions. Sterling resolved to have words with her. He intended to remind her that nobody, and especially not a young nurse of color, was indispensable. As far as he was concerned, there were lines that should never be crossed. Not even in the name of patient safety. The confrontation was as inevitable as the dawn. "Doctor." Sterling summoned Maya to his office, a chamber of polished hardwood, crowded bookshelves, and numerous framed diplomas. Everything about the room radiated importance, from the angle of the desk that forced visitors to look upward to the tight arrangement of seats that ensured guests felt slightly out of place. "Sit down, Washington," Sterling commanded, barely looking up. For half a minute, he shuffled papers, performing a ritual of dominance. Maya, however, was immune. She sat, back straight, hands folded, eyes observant. No trembling, no anxious pursuit of approval, just a quiet acceptance of whatever was to come. "Your work has not gone unnoticed, but I have serious concerns about your conduct," Sterling began, his tone a mixture of accusation and warning. "You've repeatedly discussed pharmacology with patient families and questioned physician orders. That's not the role of a nurse. Nurses don't diagnose or recommend, and most definitely don't encroach upon territory reserved for physicians." Maya listened, her face a mask of serenity. "If a patient's life is at stake due to a medication error, is it not my ethical obligation to speak up? Your obligation is to follow orders and uphold established channels of communication," Sterling replied sharply. "This isn't school. This is a real hospital with real consequences." Maya felt every word, not as an insult, but as a reflection on the culture she navigated daily. She'd seen it before, the way competence in the wrong hands, from the wrong person, was treated as rebellion rather than resourcefulness. She knew exactly the type of struggle she was in for. Without apology, Maya stood her ground. "I'll be more mindful, but I won't compromise patient safety just to avoid making someone uncomfortable." The exchange was noted throughout the unit. Nurses exchanged nervous looks. Some admired her composure, others braced for the fallout. Sterling, feeling his control slip, resolved that this would not be the end. Maya, unfazed, left his office, already sensing that her mere presence had become a problem, one that would demand all her strength to survive. The following days slid into weeks, an unrelenting test of Maya's endurance and resolve. The harmony of the ward was upset in intangible ways. Schedules shifted subtly. Assignments became more demanding. Maya found herself consistently on the least desirable shifts. Deep nights, lonely weekends, holidays when the world celebrated, but the hospital, her world, demanded sacrifice. Her caseload grew heavier too. Complex patients with multiple needs, emergencies that demanded the endurance of a marathon runner and the focus of a chess master. Yet Maya faced every obstacle with measured professionalism. She documented everything, not just her clinical decisions, but every curious glance, each subtle change in behavior from her colleagues. Janet Rodriguez, ever the watchful observer, pulled her aside late one night. "Can I ask you something, Maya? What happened with Sterling? He's making your life hell." Maya gave a wan smile. "He believes I cross lines, that I threaten the way things are done." Janet nodded, her gaze sharp. "He's driving you out. I've seen it before." A pause, heavy with lost names. Once with a nurse who challenged the protocols, she left. Another time, a male nurse who suggested improvements. He was gone in months. He documents everything, always builds his case. Maya listened, undeterred. She wasn't ignorant of the risks, but for every rebuke, every orchestrated slight, every late-night glare, she doubled down, offering thorough, evidence-backed care to patients, never letting her growing fatigue show. It was only a matter of time before the confrontation escalated. Every hospital is a living thing. And rumors spread like infection. As Maya's name circulated, so did talk of her resilience, her ethics, her enigmatic background. She would soon discover just how much power, both hidden and overt, shaped the fate of even the most competent staff. What she couldn't anticipate was how a single phone call would tear the hospital's history of discrimination wide open, forever altering the course of her life and the lives of everyone around her. As Maya labored through one grueling shift after another, the undercurrents within Metropolitan General began to surge, the ward always buzzing with activity, now pulsed with an unspoken tension, a collective awareness that something was off-kilter in the balance of the hospital. Whispers blossomed not just among the nurses, but the support staff and residents, each passing remark rippling outward in a blend of concern, curiosity, and caution. Some nurses quietly forged alliances. Janet Rodriguez, with her years of institutional memory, became Maya's confidant and informal mentor, guiding her on navigating not just medical complexity, but the labyrinthine politics that dictated career survival. Janet knew the subtle difference between support that uplifted and support that endangered. One word misplaced could mark someone for isolation. Yet not all eyes regarded Maya with kindness. Two of the charge nurses, accustomed to wielding their own slice of authority, watched with narrowed gazes. To them, hospital order was not just about health. It was control, a carefully preserved mechanism for maintaining power within their domain. Maya's rising reputation, her ease with technology, and her quick, often correct, clinical judgments felt like an encroachment on turf. Soon mundane tasks received extra scrutiny, with Maya's charting reviewed twice, sometimes 3 times, for any mistake. Still among the junior nurses and medical assistants, Maya's presence had a different impact. Her gentle smile in moments of crisis, her patient explanations of procedures, these inspired hope. When she paused to comfort a distraught family or to advocate for someone overlooked by the system, it resonated, triggering memories of why they had chosen this difficult path themselves. Outside her own circle of influence, Maya became a silent role model. People saw in her ability to weather adversity without bitterness, the seed of change. Young Black nurses, in particular, took note. Her refusal to shrink beneath microaggressions or passively accept injustice was quietly transformative. One evening, a group of residents approached her with a question about arrhythmia protocols. Her expertise, delivered with humility, fostered respect, and that respect soon became a shield. Through these shifting currents, Janet warned her again, "Be careful, Maya. The higher you climb, the stronger the winds. You're not alone, but some would prefer you were." Maya understood the implications. She was growing into a figure not just of competence, but of quiet courage. And while that drew admiration from some, it invited scrutiny and resentment from others with power to wound. The story reached a new precipice when Maya, midway through an exhausting 14-hour shift, received a phone call that would rattle the facade of Metropolitan General. In the midst of charting on Mrs. Patterson, the unit secretary approached her with agitation barely disguised. "Maya, you have a call. Urgent." Outpatient oncology. She excused herself from the nurse's station, heart beginning to race. Phone calls rarely brought good news in her world. On the other end, a familiar trembling voice spoke. "Maya, it's Dr. Elaine Carter from Outpatient. I need you to come downstairs. Now." Down in the outpatient wing, the air was brisk and charged with a different kind of urgency. Dr. Carter, a respected oncologist known for her integrity and activism, breathed. "I know you're struggling," Carter admitted, voice hushed. "I've seen subtle reassignments, unnecessary disciplinary notes, and today, Sterling tried to change your schedule again with no clinical justification." She handed Maya a file, marked confidential. Inside were documents, emails, and internal memos, a pattern of deliberate targeting spanning 6 months. Dr. Carter continued, "You're not the first. This hospital has a record, a quiet one, of pushing out brilliant young professionals of color. What happens isn't an accident, it's calculated." Maya's hands trembled. She read words meant to be hidden, remarks from supervisors, coded language about fit, attitude, and overstepping. Proof of a system that policed excellence with as much energy as it promoted healing. It was not just about her. It was all those pushed out before her, the talented who had vanished. "It's time to fight back," Carter said, her eyes meeting Maya's. "But you must be strategic. If you're willing, there might be allies, more than you think." The weight of revelation pressed down, mingling outrage with fear. For years, Maya had heard stories, but documentation made it undeniable. The question was no longer whether injustice thrived here. It was whether Maya's will could withstand the storm, and if she could be more than a lone survivor. Maya returned to her ward different, awakened, her resolve now fused with a powerful sense of responsibility not just to herself, but to all those unnamed voices who had suffered the same fate. She confided in Janet, showing her the documents, detailing Carter's plan to rally a coalition for institutional change. The two women sat in a shadowed corner of the break room, their conversation charged with cautious optimism. Janet, usually reserved, spoke urgently. "If you go public, expect the worst. Sterling won't lose quietly. But this could mean something, Maya. For you, for the rest of us." They began reaching out discreetly. Nurses whom Janet trusted, several residents sympathetic to Maya's ordeal, even a retired doctor who had once challenged the hospital's discipline committee. Each person, when shown the evidence, reacted with a mixture of shock and solidarity. Within a week, what started as a whisper grew into a quiet resistance. Stories emerged. Others who had experienced similar threats, subtle sabotage, the same orchestrated exclusions. The pattern was clear. The hospital's hierarchy was as much a fortress as it was a sanctuary. In private meetings, strategies were developed. Time was spent documenting every interaction, every assignment, every deviation from standard policy. Maya's network collected testimony from former employees, nurses of color whose careers had been derailed, denied promotions, or subjected to spurious accusations. These narratives, woven together, formed a tapestry too damning to ignore. Yet fear remained a near constant companion. For every ally, there were others intent on defending the status quo. Rumors circulated about the possibility of coordinated backlash against those who spoke out. Still, the seed of rebellion had taken root. Maya grappled with her anxieties. At night, she questioned whether she could bear the consequences, not just for herself, but for her family, for those who depended on her income, her stability. But the injustice, once illuminated, demanded action. The struggle was not merely personal. It had become deeply, indelibly communal. The battle for dignity and fairness took a harrowing psychological toll. Once, Maya found herself in a supply closet, fists clenched, tears streaming down her face. The relentless demands, the hours filled with vigilance, the constant anticipation of retaliation. These burdens were invisible to the outside world. Her family at home, proud of her achievements, sensed only the jagged edge of her exhaustion, but understood little of the forces arrayed against her. Yet each time Maya contemplated walking away, she remembered other faces. Freshmen on her unit, new to the city, who looked to her as proof that survival was possible. Patients who found comfort in her empathy, who saw in her resilience the promise of healing that transcended medicine. In her lowest moments, these quiet affirmations pulled her back from the brink. Janet remained her lodestar, providing stable ground when the world threatened to collapse. She quietly protected Maya whenever possible, shielding her from unnecessary scrutiny, intervening in ways visible and invisible. Together, they established a silent code of endurance, a gesture, a glance, words of encouragement when the outside pressure grew suffocating. Still, every morning before her shifts, Maya wrestled with inner storms. She journaled her fears and her hopes, her frustration and her gratitude, channeling the tumult inside into words that sometimes burned with rage, sometimes trembled with hope. In those private reflections, she promised herself she would not become invisible. The more Maya endured, the more she saw the intricate connections between her struggle and those of countless others, women who had defied expectation, Black professionals who had carved paths through hostile terrain. Her fight was not just against an individual, but against a system whose roots ran deep. She began to see herself not as a solitary figure on a battlefield, but as a link in a chain stretching far into the past and future. Her suffering became a testimony. Each scar a declaration that she would not and could not give up. The crisis reached a fever pitch One rainy Tuesday morning, Maya was assigned to 3 critical care patients. All required constant monitoring, each threaded to machines that whispered of fragile lives. The intensity of her caseload was unlike anything she'd managed before. With every beep, every rush of adrenaline, she felt her margins shrinking. That same day, Dr. Sterling launched an official investigation, citing persistent insubordination and potential risk to patient care. He circulated emails demanding reviews of Maya's work. Setting the stage for a public showdown, the unit transformed into a theater of tension. Nurses awkwardly avoided Maya, unsure whether to offer support or keep their distance, lest they be targeted as well. The administration called meetings. Sterling presented his case. Missed protocols, supposed attitude problems, and exaggerated infractions. His words dripped with icy authority, intended to frame Maya as a disruptive presence. But allies rallied. Janet, Dr. Carter, several residents spoke fearlessly, providing counter-testimony and evidence of the pattern of discrimination. They argued that the very skills Sterling attacked were often what saved patients and prevented errors that others overlooked. The storm spilled into the open. Each day, a series of dramatic confrontations, emotional breakdowns, and whispered encouragements. Patients asked about Maya, demanding she not be removed. Community advocates entered the fray, signaling the beginning of media attention. The pressure mounted, exposing what had always been hidden behind sterile walls, a battle for justice that had reached its tipping point. As the hospital reckoned with its legacy, Maya stood at the crossroads. Was she willing to lose everything for the chance to transform not just her own fate, but the destiny of Metropolitan General? Through the uncertainty, one thing was clear. Maya's story had become a catalyst, a force that could no longer be contained. The walls at Metropolitan General seemed to grow thinner with each confrontation. Tension, once contained within whispers, spilled into open meetings, and morale across the entire cardiology floor began to shift. Maya's forced isolation was met by flashes of solidarity, nods of encouragement in the hallway, notes of support slipped into her bag, and messages of gratitude from patients who had witnessed her unwavering compassion. Janet's deep-rooted wisdom guided the younger staff through these volatile days. She rallied nurses quietly, reminding them of their duty not just to follow orders, but to uphold the humanity at the core of their oath. Dr. Elaine Carter expanded the coalition, inviting senior medical staff and members of the Diversity Committee to join strategy sessions. In the bowels of the hospital, where break room conversations ran the deepest, Maya's story became a touchstone for transformation, not just in policy, but in daily attitude. The coalition collected more documentation, and with every recorded instance, the lens on Sterling's practices sharpened. Medical students who had once feared retribution felt emboldened to share their experiences. They circulated an anonymous survey, which revealed that more staff had endured similar targeting, sometimes for small mistakes, other times for expressing ideas that challenged entrenched protocols. Out of this unity grew a new sense of power. Staff began to find their collective voice. practicing what Janet called quiet resistance, refusing gossip designed to isolate Maya, double-checking each other's documentation to avoid traps, and ensuring every patient received the highest level of attention so no one could invoke concerns as a pretext. The environment transformed from one of intimidation to one charged with hope. Everyone on the floor understood that they were witnessing not just a professional dispute, but a pivotal moment that could redefine relationships, standards, and future opportunities for every marginalized caregiver within these walls. For the first time since Maya's arrival, Metropolitan General felt less like an impersonal institution and more like a living community, pulsing with possibility. Victory, however, came at a steep personal cost. As public scrutiny mounted, Maya's life outside the hospital became increasingly fraught. Calls from news outlets disrupted her evenings. Social media, once a place of solace, exploded with opinions, some supportive, others desperate to discredit her. She found herself explaining, again and again, why she hadn't just walked away. At family dinners, her parents, proud but frightened for her future, worried aloud about the possibility of retaliation. Could she lose her job, her security, even her career? Maya tried to shield them from the magnitude of her pain, but each new headline, each pointed question, was a reminder that her struggle was now writ large for all to witness. Isolation crept in alongside stress. Old friends retreated, unsure how to offer support, some even fearing association with controversy. Maya's sleep became restless, haunted by dreams of sterile corridors and the faces of those she wished she could save. She began meeting regularly with Dr. Carter, not just for strategy, but for counseling, with each session unraveling new knots of anxiety she hadn't allowed herself to name. Every time she prepared her uniform, Maya glimpsed herself in the mirror, searching her reflection for traces of the old confidence. What she found surprised her, not fear, but a sense of moral obligation. She reminded herself that suffering was the price of change, that silence could not construct the world she'd always wished to inhabit. Janet would call late at night, offering reminders to breathe, to remember her worth, and to recall the real power she held, the truth of her story, the lives she had already touched and would continue to touch. Across medical units and in emails, she found little pockets of support. Former patients, union representatives, even rival nurses who admitted, in private, that they envied her resolve. Yet through all adversity, Maya's commitment deepened. The more she was tested, the more her internal flame burned. Her sacrifice became the silent heartbeat beneath the movement, giving others courage, even as the world demanded she pay with doubt, exhaustion, and vulnerability. As the investigation against Maya moved from the shadows into daylight, Metropolitan General was forced to reckon with truths long evaded. The hospital board convened a special committee to review not only Sterling's accusations, but the broader climate of bias. The meetings were tense and fraught, full of impassioned testimonies, detailed reports, and impromptu declarations that revealed just how deep the issue ran. The committee, led by an impartial administrator, invited Maya to speak. As she entered the boardroom, sunlight filtering through tall windows, she felt the weight of history press onto her shoulders. Her heart pounded, but she steadied herself with memories of every patient she'd served, every colleague she'd defended, and every injustice she'd endured for the sake of others. Maya's statement was clear and powerful, stitched together from the pain of experience and the hope of a better future. This is not about a single mistake or one person's conflict. It is about a culture that too often confuses humility for weakness and sees empowerment as arrogance. I am asking you to see us, all of us, not simply as workers, but as healers, advocates, and change agents, Janet testified, describing the nuances of daily microaggressions and the vague concerns weaponized against promising staff. Dr. Carter provided data on turnover among nurses of color, exposing a long-standing pattern of exclusion that could no longer be denied. Sterling, confronted with documents and recordings, defended his decisions, framing them as necessary for patient safety. But his reasoning faltered when scrutinized by multiple witnesses. Other staff bravely shared their perspectives, highlighting the positive outcomes sparked by Maya's insistence on critical thinking and open dialogue. The entire hospital seemed to hold its breath, awaiting a verdict. Reporters camped outside, patients signed petitions, and even city health officials took notice. The committee announced it would deliberate for several days, promising a recommendation that would reflect not just on Maya's case, but on the future values of Metropolitan General itself. Maya experienced a strange calm. Whatever the result, she had achieved something she once believed impossible. She had forced the system to look at itself, not through the pristine sheen of tradition, but through the messy mirror of its everyday reality. The days that followed were both excruciating and electric, as if every hallway, every office, every quiet corner of Metropolitan General buzzed with the anticipation of the committee's final decision. Maya hovered at the edge of exhaustion and hope, her nerves frayed, but sustained by the unity of her supporters. Staff performed their duties with heightened vigilance. Janet kept a careful watch for signs of backlash, while Dr. Carter briefed union representatives and maintained pressure on hospital leadership to act transparently. Across the city, local community leaders joined in, publicizing Maya's case as a symbol of broader struggles faced by professionals across healthcare. During one difficult night, Maya collapsed in the break room, overcome by the intensity. She wept openly, supported by Janet and two junior nurses who had found in her strength a model for their own. When she finally wiped her eyes, she felt cleansed. In that moment, Maya realized that real transformation often required vulnerability and was built not just on courage, but on profound humanity. On the day of the verdict, the hospital assembled all staff in a large conference room. Maya stood at the center, surrounded by colleagues, advocates, and the watchful eyes of the press. The committee chair spoke, voice ringing with purpose. The evidence shows a consistent pattern of differential treatment. Unjust targeting and culturally rooted bias within this institution, she declared. Nurse Washington acted consistently in the best interest of patients, demonstrating exceptional professional judgment and compassion. No cause for disciplinary action is found. We acknowledge the heroic, necessary work you have done, but our institution failed to support you. The room erupted in applause. Relief, joy, vindication mingling with tears. Even some who had stood against her felt the sweep of change. They understood now how Maya had exposed not just personal flaws, but systemic truths that needed attention. Maya felt her spirit soar, a rush of energy, a release from fear, and the beginning of something new. In the aftermath of victory, Maya became a beacon not only for Metropolitan General, but for hospitals across the region. Her story appeared in medical journals, diversity conferences, and healthcare podcasts. She was invited to speak about her experience, sharing the lessons woven from adversity and hope. Inside the hospital, reforms arrived swiftly. Training on bias and workplace equality was implemented. Attendance mandatory for all staff. The administration expanded support networks, establishing confidential hotlines and peer mentorship programs. Many modeled on the informal support Maya and Janet had crafted out of necessity. Sterling, stripped of his unchecked authority, was transferred to a non-leadership role. Quietly, Maya met with him in the days after the verdict, offering him the chance to learn, not in anger, but in the spirit of transformative justice. She expressed gratitude for the ways he had forced her to grow, yet did not waver from the truth. Transformation required humility from all involved. Janet became lead charge nurse of the cardiology unit, her skill and wisdom finally recognized. She and Maya worked together to ensure the unit's new culture prioritized mentorship, empowerment, and shared decision-making. Morale climbed among nurses, and patient families sang the praises of a team whose care extended beyond medicine to encompass dignity and respect. Maya's journey swept through all levels of the hospital. Medical residents sought her advice, aspiring nurses looked to her as a role model, and patients viewed her presence as a tangible sign of compassion in an often impersonal world. Maya herself remained humble. In every quiet moment, she remembered both the pain and triumph that had brought her to this place. Her story was about more than her own victory. It was about the capacity to transform suffering into healing for others. Every day, in every interaction, she honored those who had come before, and the countless souls who would walk this path after her. With Metropolitan General, now a case study in meaningful institutional reform, Maya's legacy spilled beyond the walls that once felt confining. News of the hospital's transformation rippled through the city's vast healthcare network. Other nurses who had considered quitting or changing careers reached out. Some even traveled across the city just to meet Maya in a quiet corner of the nurses' lounge. Tears in their eyes as they whispered, "Thank you. You made me believe I could belong here too." Professional networks took notice. Invitations arrived for Maya to join panels on equity and medical ethics. Her phone filled with messages from medical students and fellow nurses, many from underrepresented backgrounds, seeking advice on how to persevere and challenge injustice. Some shared stories chillingly similar to her own, tales of gifted professionals, brilliant women of color, quietly pushed to the margins, their gifts overlooked until they faded away. Maya responded to each with compassion and honest counsel, always reminding them to anchor themselves in community, to find allies in unexpected places, and to know that speaking up was itself a form of hope. Metropolitan General's administrative leadership. The first recipient, a young black nurse named Tanesha, became Maya's mentee. In the glow of mutual respect, Maya saw her own early self, passionate, unyielding, and hungry to serve. Meanwhile, changes in policy began to take hold, not just in dry memos, but in daily life. Hospital units now featured reflection boards, where staff could anonymously share concerns and affirmations. The union, energized by Maya and Janet's example, lobbied for safer reporting procedures and more diverse hiring panels. Late one evening, as Maya walked the hallways, she glimpsed a young intern hesitating before entering a patient's room. With a gentle smile, she paused, offered encouragement, and watched as the interns straightened their shoulders and stepped forward. In that tiny moment, Maya recognized the beauty of her journey, not only in the seismic changes, but in thousands of quiet acts of courage that added up to lasting transformation. For months after the storm, Maya found herself reckoning with old wounds, scars that ran deeper than bruised ego or professional stress. She met often with Dr. Carter, whose steady counsel helped her disentangle the grief and anger that lingered after battle. Together, they spoke of the thousands of small humiliations, the silent breaches of trust that shaped the landscape of healthcare for so many. "I never wanted to become a symbol," Maya confessed during one session. "I just wanted to do what's right." Carter smiled, her eyes kind. "Symbols choose us, Maya. But you never stopped being a person. That is your power." Maya took time for herself, reconnecting with her family, immersing herself in music, reading, and the comfort of old friendships weathered by time. She allowed herself to rest, to grieve, and finally, to celebrate. These days, she no longer flinched at moments of acclaim, nor did she shrink from the new responsibilities that her story had placed before her. The hardest conversations, however, were with those she'd lost along the way. Colleagues who had turned away out of fear or envy, friendships strained under the weight of suspicion. Some, emboldened by Maya's vindication, sought her forgiveness, expressing regret for their silence or indifference. Maya met these moments with grace. "We all do what we must to survive," she would say. "But now that we know better, we can do better together." Through this process, the unit's culture softened, grew more self-aware. People learned to apologize, to listen, to call out not just overt injustice, but casual jokes or microaggressions that chipped away at dignity. Like a wound exposed to air, the pain of the past faded under the sunlight of real accountability and compassion. Maya, in healing herself, found the wisdom to help others begin that same journey. Seasons changed. The hospital's rhythms ebbed and flowed. Maya's role evolved, less restricted by task and hierarchy, more invested in nurturing future caregivers. She spearheaded a mentorship program, modeled on her hard-won lessons, focused on developing not just clinical expertise, but emotional resilience and advocacy. Every month, new recruits gathered in the sunlit conference room to hear Maya's story. Instead of focusing on her triumph, she spoke honestly about her doubts, the nights spent on the edge of despair, the strength derived from unlikely friendships. "We need you to be excellent nurses," she'd say, "but we need you even more to be brave human beings." One day, a soft-spoken new hire named Luis approached Maya after a workshop, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm gay and the first in my family to work in medicine," he said quietly. "Did you ever feel like you just didn't fit?" Maya listened, recalling her own struggles. She reached for his hand. "Every day. But what matters is knowing that you do belong, and that your difference can save a life, yours included. Find your community, and when you're ready, help someone else do the same." As her mentorship grew, a new sense of purpose took hold. Maya's wisdom echoed through each participant, each gradually empowered to challenge injustice and foster inclusion in ways authentic to themselves. Some started projects for linguistic access, others advocated for mental health resources. All felt emboldened, not just by Maya's story, but by the knowledge that transformation was possible. One voice, one act at a time. Janet, ever wise, often reminded Maya, "You're not just passing a baton. You're lighting fires that will never go out." Inside Metropolitan General, the hospital reawakened as a place of genuine healing, not just for patients, but for staff and the wider community. The impact of Maya's journey became evident during the first annual Voices of Care celebration, an event honoring caregivers who helped reshape the culture. The auditorium overflowed with emotion as speakers recounted stories of resilience and quiet revolution. Patients, too, had taken note. Former cardiac patients returned to thank Maya and Janet in person, sometimes arriving with their families. One grandmother, who had survived a life-threatening episode under Maya's care, hugged her tightly. "You didn't just save my life," she whispered. "You healed my family's heart." Support staff, from janitors to kitchen workers, shared how the new policies had empowered them to report concerns without fear. "This place isn't perfect, but it listens now," said Aaliyah from the night cleaning crew, a beaming smile lighting her face. Local news outlets chronicled these changes, not as mere reactions to scandal, but as evidence of what happens when people have the courage to confront the truth together. Students flocked to apply for internships, eager to join an institution once infamous, now renowned for its progressive values and inclusive leadership. For Maya, these moments of gratitude were both humbling and extraordinary. She found herself able to breathe deeper, laugh longer, and hold her loved ones without the grim tension that had defined her early days at the hospital. Gratitude, she realized, was not merely thanks for a deed done, but a promise to carry the work forward for generations yet to come. Years passed, snow falling softly outside the hospital some mornings, golden light spilling across the lobby on others. New crises emerged, new injustices to confront. But the foundation built by Maya and her allies remained sturdy, a promise etched into every corner of Metropolitan General. Maya, now a sought-after leader and advocate, found joy not just in accolades, but in the daily, often invisible work of supporting others. She continued to teach, to mentor, and above all, to listen. She shepherded new social justice committees, guided former adversaries into allies, and ensured the journey she began would continue long after her own footsteps faded from those busy hallways. She visited high schools and community centers, inspiring the next generation with her story. Her former mentees grew into leaders themselves, building bridges rooted in the lessons Maya embodied. Resist injustice, uplift each other, nurture hope even in the bleakest hour. Through it all, Maya cherished the friendships and families built as much as the victories won. She knew the work would never be complete, that injustice would always find new shapes, but believed fiercely that faith, courage, and solidarity could pierce even the deepest darkness. As she stood by a sunlit window overlooking the city, Maya reflected on the path she had traveled, from an ambitious young nurse with a whisper of purpose to a force that had rewritten the language of healing itself. Her journey, forged in adversity, had become a beacon, reminding all who entered those halls that every act of compassion, however small, made history. And so the story of hope, struggle, and transformation continued, not as a finished tale, but as an ever-expanding circle of empathy, forged and strengthened by those who dared, like Maya, to be both brave and kind.